Have you ever noticed that the more you try to control everything, the more chaotic life becomes? What if the very act of worrying is the reason things fall apart? We live in a world that rewards hypervigilance. We're taught to plan, predict, prepare, and then plan again. But in this obsessive effort to outmaneuver life, we rarely pause to consider the costs: peace, clarity, presence of mind. Michel de Montaigne, a 16th century French philosopher and essayist, saw the trap centuries before us. His solution? Simply let go. Not in weakness, but in wisdom. Because sometimes, the moment you stop clenching your fists, life meets you with open hands. In this video, we'll explore how surrendering worry, not as apathy but as trust, can lead to a surprising kind of freedom. We'll follow Montaigne's path through radical acceptance, the illusion of control, and the quiet power of doing nothing. If you watch to the end, you may just find that the less you grip life, the more gracefully it flows. The mind is a labyrinth. Let's walk its shadows together. Worry is a strange and silent thief. It steals moments from the present by dragging our minds into the shadowy territory of what if? What if I fail? What if something terrible happens? What if I'm not enough? These questions echo endlessly, building a cage of imagined futures that never arrive. Michel de Montaigne recognized this centuries ago when he said, "A man who fears suffering is already suffering from what he fears." In other words, the act of worrying is itself a kind of suffering, an unnecessary burden we carry for events that might never happen. Modern psychology confirms Montaigne's insight. Worry triggers our brain's stress response in a loop, hijacking the prefrontal cortex, the seat of our reasoning, and trapping us in anxiety's feedback cycle. Instead of solving problems, excessive worry exhausts our mental resources, making it harder to think clearly or act effectively. It distorts reality, turning small uncertainties into towering threats. The more we try to control the uncontrollable, the deeper we sink into this mental quicksand. What makes worry so heavy is its fixation on a future that doesn't exist yet. It pulls our attention away from what's real, the here and now, into a realm of uncertainty, fear, and anticipation. This mental time travel erodes our ability to experience life fully. Montaigne's writings invite us to pause and ask, are these fears truly ours, or just shadows cast by our imagination? Most of what we dread never comes to pass. Worry is often a mirage, and chasing it leaves us thirsty for peace. Moreover, worry creates paralysis. It breeds indecision and avoidance. When the mind is overwhelmed by what-ifs, it can't act freely or creatively. The result is emotional stagnation, a psychological freeze that keeps us trapped. Montaigne's essays serve as a mirror, reflecting this human tendency and reminding us that freedom begins with releasing the grip of fear. In a world obsessed with control and certainty, Montaigne's message feels simple yet revolutionary: to suffer less, worry less. Instead of constantly wrestling with fate, he suggests a gentler approach, accepting life's unpredictability. This doesn't mean giving up. It means recognizing that control is often an illusion and that surrender can be a form of strength. If you're liking this video, please like and subscribe now. It helps the channel to grow. Thanks for your support. Understanding the weight of worry is the first step toward lightening our mental load. When we see worry for the false burden that it is, we open the door to clarity and calm. Montaigne's wisdom guides us not to eradicate worry overnight, but to observe it, acknowledge its presence, and gradually loosen its hold. Because only then can we reclaim the present moment, where life actually happens. Michel de Montaigne did not write from a place of luxury or detachment. He lived through waves of personal illness, the death of close friends, and the violent collapse of France during the wars of religion. Yet, amidst this chaos, he cultivated a strange serenity, not through control, but through acceptance. Montaigne's philosophy was not forged in abstract theory. It was lived, observed, and tested in suffering. He realized that resisting what life brings only compounds our pain. Acceptance, on the other hand, transforms it. His version of acceptance was not passive resignation. It was an active acknowledgement of life's wild unpredictability. He embraced the messiness, the contradictions, the randomness of being alive. "We are all patchwork," he wrote, fragments of thought, emotion, and impulse sewn together by experience. He didn't seek to perfect or control that patchwork. He sought to understand it, and in doing so made peace with it. This acceptance was radical because it rejected the illusion of mastery. Most of us believe that if we just think harder and plan better, we can outmaneuver fate. Montaigne let go of that fantasy. He understood that no amount of anxious preparation would spare him from death, illness, or disappointment. Instead, he turned inward, not to escape, but to ground himself. He journaled his thoughts, tracked his emotions, and sat with discomfort rather than escaping it. In today's terms, he practiced emotional mindfulness long before the practice even had a name. Montaigne's power came not from defiance, but from humility. He accepted that being human meant being vulnerable. He didn't view suffering as a failure, but as a teacher. And rather than hardening against life's uncertainty, he softened into it. That softening made him resilient. He wrote about his kidney stones with the same calm detachment he brought to political unrest, as if to say, "This too is life, and I will not let it fracture my soul." Importantly, Montaigne didn't idealize Stoicism in the traditional sense. Where the Stoics often advocated for emotional detachment, Montaigne allowed room for feeling, for fear, for grief, even for joy. But he didn't let these emotions control him. He observed them, learned from them, and then released them. His version of acceptance was one of compassion, a willingness to experience all of life, not just the parts that feel good or make sense. This form of acceptance is revolutionary in our age of performance and productivity. Today, we're trained to curate, fix, and optimize things. But Montaigne shows us that peace comes not from doing more, but from needing less. Not from fixing life, but from being present with it, exactly as it is. The radical move is not to transcend the mess, but to make meaning within it. Montaigne's philosophy doesn't ask us to deny pain. It asks us to sit beside it without fear, to observe it without becoming it. In this way, we reclaim our agency, not by fighting life's uncertainty, but by learning to live comfortably inside it. We are creatures obsessed with control. From daily routines to 5-year plans, from productivity apps to strategic self-branding, we build rituals that give us the illusion that life can be managed, measured, and predicted. And when things spiral, when relationships break, plans fail, or illness strikes, we're not just hurt, we're disoriented. We feel betrayed by a world that doesn't obey the rules we quietly believed in. But Michel de Montaigne would argue that the betrayal lies not in the world, but in our expectations. "My life has been full of terrible misfortunes," he wrote, "most of which never happened." The mind, always rehearsing disaster, clings to the idea that if we worry enough or control enough, we'll be safe. But control is a fiction. Life remains indifferent to our calculations. The more we chase certainty, the more anxious and brittle we become. What Montaigne reveals, gently and persistently, is that much of our suffering comes from this misalignment between that which we want to hold and that which can never be held. Control is seductive because it offers a temporary sense of power. It whispers that if we do everything right, we won't have to feel pain, regret, or fear. But Montaigne saw through this whisper. He lived among plague, civil war, and spiritual collapse. And through that, he realized, life is not a problem to be solved, but a rhythm to be felt. In his essays, he doesn't offer clever answers or frameworks. He offers reflections. He walks through the contradictions of human nature. allowing paradox to exist without forcing resolution. He doesn't conquer the chaos, he befriends it. His writing mirrors life's flux, flowing from topic to topic, blending humor with grief, body with mind. This meandering style is no accident, it's philosophical surrender. He lets thought follow experience, not dominate it. Modern psychology is following suit. Research shows that the need for control, when overactivated, correlates with anxiety disorders, obsessive behaviors, and chronic dissatisfaction. The more tightly we grip to things, the more fragile we become. True well-being, it turns out, comes not from control, but from flexibility, the ability to adapt, to let go, to pivot when life demands it. In this regard, Montaigne was centuries ahead of his time. Ironically, when we release the need to control everything, life often begins to move more fluidly. We stop forcing outcomes and start responding to what actually is. Montaigne wasn't preaching helplessness. He was pointing to a deeper strength, the courage to live without guarantees. Such courage makes room for spontaneity, creativity, and resilience. It allows us to live from presence, not protection. Letting go of control doesn't mean becoming passive. It means shifting from fear-based action to awareness-based response. It means seeing the mind's tendency to predict and prepare as a trait, not a truth. Montaigne invited us into this awareness, not with urgency, but with calm observation. He would say, walk slowly, look clearly, and stop pretending that the world owes you predictability. In doing so, he offered something radical, a philosophy not of dominance, but of harmony. A way of living that begins not with conquest, but with consent. Consent to uncertainty, to emotion, to contradiction. And in that consent, something unexpected happens. Peace enters, not as a reward, but as a companion. Not because we've mastered life, but because we've finally stopped trying to master it. What happens when you stop trying to script your identity? When you cease presenting yourself as a curated version of what you think others expect, and instead, just allow yourself to be. For Michel de Montaigne, the answer was liberation. His essays, some of the most introspective works of the Renaissance, didn't aim to convince or dazzle. They were confessions, not of sin, but of humanity. In his pages, we find a man who admits to his fears, his inconsistencies, his forgetfulness, his bodily discomforts. He wrote about kidney stones, fear of death, sexual impotence, and even boredom. These were not weaknesses to be hidden. They were experiences to be examined. Because, to Montaigne, to be human was to be full of contradiction. And in that contradiction, there was peace. Self-acceptance, in Montaigne's world, wasn't about self-esteem in the modern pop psychology sense. It was about seeing clearly. About dropping the exhausting charade of perfection and recognizing that the self is not a project to be completed, but a phenomenon to be observed. He didn't try to fix himself into a coherent brand. He simply sat with himself, curious, amused, and sometimes baffled. This is more than a philosophical quirk. It is psychological strategy. When we judge ourselves, we fragment. We try to suppress the parts that don't align with our idealized image. The fear, the laziness, the envy, the sorrow. But suppression only intensifies these feelings. Like steam sealed in a pressure cooker, denied emotions expand in the dark. Montaigne turned on the light. By accepting his flaws without dramatizing them, he disarmed their power over him. His honesty didn't make him more vulnerable to judgment. It made him untouchable. What can you mock in a person who's already laughed at himself? What can you expose in someone who has nothing to hide? In a world where identity is often a performance, Montaigne reminds us that truth is a kind of freedom. And this isn't just ancient wisdom. Modern psychology supports it. Studies in self-compassion show that people who accept their imperfections are more resilient, more creative, and more emotionally stable than those who constantly self-monitor. The act of allowing what is, of saying, yes, this is part of me too, breaks the cycle of internal war. This is not the same as complacency. Montaigne did not wallow in his flaws. He studied them, learned from them, even laughed at them. That's the paradox. Self-acceptance is not the enemy of growth. It is its starting point. Change doesn't emerge from self-hatred. It comes from understanding, from intimacy with the self. And this is why Montaigne's work feels timeless. Because he wasn't writing about how to be better. He was writing about how to be real. In a society obsessed with image, polish, and optimization, the idea that you are enough even in your awkwardness is revolutionary. We spend so much of our lives trying to sculpt ourselves into something lovable, admirable, or safe. But Montaigne proposes something far more subversive, that we were never unlovable to begin with. That wholeness doesn't come from fixing what is broken, but from including what we've been taught to exile. When we embrace this, worry loses its fuel, because so much of our anxiety stems from trying to manage appearances, trying to be better than who we fear we are. But if we can sit in the mirror with all our contradictions, our rawness, our crooked smiles, and insecure hearts, and simply say, "Yes, that's me," something profound happens. We stop needing to be perfect to be at peace, and in that disarmed, unarmored state, we come alive. Control is often mistaken for strength. We're taught to grip harder when things slip, to double down when life becomes uncertain, to conquer our fears by planning, mastering, and perfecting every detail. But Michel de Montaigne, quietly observing the chaos of his own mind and the collapsing world around him, discovered something astonishing. Strength does not always reside in control. Sometimes it lives in the release of control. Letting go isn't apathy. It isn't passivity. It is the disciplined practice of not clinging, of recognizing the boundary between what is yours and what never was. In his retreat from public life, Montaigne chose to let go of the career ladder, the games of power, and the constant noise of political ambition. This wasn't weakness, it was clarity. He withdrew, not to escape life, but to meet it more intimately. His tower library, where he spent most of his time, became his world. Not because he was avoiding reality, but because he wanted to understand it without distortion. Letting go, then, is not weakness. It is an act of emotional precision. It's the moment you stop fighting the river and start flowing with it, not because you've given up, but because you finally realize the river was never yours to command. Modern psychology backs this up. In therapy, acceptance and commitment approaches, ACT, help people learn how to stop wrestling with their thoughts and instead align with their values. Athletes talk about getting into the zone, a mental state that only arises when they relinquish conscious control and trust their training. In creative fields, breakthroughs often come not through brute force, but through surrender. Stepping away, loosening the grip, letting ideas breathe, so to speak. Montaigne understood this intuitively. His strength came not from dominating uncertainty, but from dwelling in it, curiously, calmly, even joyfully. He saw that freedom was not the absence of limitation, but the absence of obsession. He observed that the mind becomes sharpest when it stops trying to be perfect. Think of how often we mistake tension for focus, rigidity for resolve. We associate clenched fists and furrowed brows with effort, but true presence, true effectiveness, rarely comes from deliberation. It comes from flow. And flow is impossible when you're fixated on control. Letting go doesn't mean abandoning intention. It means abandoning illusion. You still act, you still care, but you stop believing that your anxiety will somehow bend the universe to your will. You do what you can, and you release the rest. Montaigne's life in many ways was a template for this. He wrote when inspired. He walked when restless. He read broadly, though slowly, and allowed his mind to wander. He didn't chase legacy. He stumbled into it. He didn't demand clarity. He danced with confusion. And yet, his works remain some of the most enduring in Western philosophy, not because he tried to control history, but because he let his voice be honest and unguarded. There is power in that kind of surrender, a strength that doesn't shout but whispers. When you let go of the need to fix everything, prove everything, control everything, you free up enormous psychological space. And in that space, something greater often arises: clarity, courage, even joy. This is the paradox Montaigne helps us see. The more we let go, the more access we have to the very things we were chasing: peace, creativity, connection, resilience. They emerge not from grasping, but from trust. Letting go isn't a retreat. It's a return. Back to yourself, back to the present, back to the mysterious unfolding of life that doesn't need your worry to keep going. And when you stop clenching, you finally realize you were strong all along. It's easy to admire Montaigne from a distance, as a philosopher nestled in his library, immune to the demands of modern life, but the real power of his thought lies in its practicality. Montaigne didn't write a rigid system, he offered a mirror, and if we dare to look into it, we'll find a way of living that is radically simple, shockingly relevant, and deeply liberating. Montaigne's primary tool was the essay, a form that allowed thought to unfold without needing to arrive. So how do we bring Montaigne's approach into the 21st century? To remedy our fears, anxieties, and endless self-comparisons, it begins with observation, not optimization. The following is Montaigne's method. Feel free to try it yourself. First, start writing. Write without trying to teach or persuade. Instead, write to see what's really on your mind. Don't filter for clarity. Let contradiction live. Like Montaigne, treat your thoughts not as declarations, but as trails to follow, with no destination required. This isn't journaling as therapy, it's journaling as inquiry. Second, make space for mental wandering. Montaigne often walked in circles while thinking, not because he needed the exercise, but because thinking, for him, was physical, alive, and non-linear. In a culture obsessed with efficiency, reclaim the value of unstructured time. Let your thoughts drift. Daydream. Think without aiming. Third, learn to laugh at yourself. Montaigne wrote openly about his own absurdities, not as confessions, but as observations. He didn't dramatize his flaws, he disarmed them. If you catch yourself ruminating over a mistake, try naming it playfully. Ah, there goes my perfectionist ghost again. Humor makes space. It breaks the spell of worry by exposing its theater. Fourth, read for tension, not agreement. Montaigne devoured the works of the ancients, not to copy them, but to wrestle with them. He kept contradictory ideas in his mental landscape like house guests with opposing worldviews. Try reading authors who disturb you, confuse you, or challenge your assumptions, not to reject them, but to expand your intellectual terrain. Let your mind be a labyrinth, not a fortress. Fifth, practice the art of disengagement. Montaigne left political life when he realized it drained his soul. That doesn't mean we all need to retreat from the world, but it does mean asking, what am I gripping that I no longer need to hold? Whether it's a toxic ambition, a performance-based identity, or a relationship rooted in fear, consider stepping back, not out of weakness, but out of reverence for your inner freedom. Sixth, meditate on mortality, not to judge yourself, but to illuminate what matters. Montaigne believed that contemplating death was the key to living well. It shrinks petty fears and clarifies the present. You don't have to be morbid, just honest. The clock is always ticking, but if you stop to listen, it doesn't sound like a threat. It sounds like a rhythm, an invitation to live in the now. Finally, replace striving with sincerity. Montaigne never claimed to be enlightened. He didn't pretend to have transcended human error. His brilliance was that he stopped pretending. He approached life like a curious child, observing, fumbling, laughing, reflecting. There's power in that posture. It allows you to move through the world without the burden of performance, without the armor of anxiety. None of this is about perfection. It's about permission, the permission to be fully human, to live without rehearsing your every move, to make peace with the strange, tender, inconsistent person you are. When we live this way, unforced, unpolished, unapologetically honest, something softens. We stop chasing meaning and start making it. We stop controlling life and begin participating in it. And then, almost mysteriously, things begin to go well. Not because we've mastered life, but because we've finally stopped trying to dominate it and started embracing it instead. Worry disguises itself as wisdom. It whispers that if you just plan a little more, think a little harder, prepare a little longer, life will reward you with certainty. But Montaigne saw through this illusion. He understood that the storm outside is often quieter than the storm within. and that the more we try to grip reality, the more it slips through our fingers. His life teaches us this. Serenity doesn't come from certainty, it comes from surrender. Not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of resistance, of pretending that life must make sense before we can fully live it. You don't have to control everything. You don't even have to understand everything. You just have to be present, willing to feel, to stumble, to be flawed, and still move forward. Worry is a cage built from the bars of imagined futures, but presence is the key, and self-acceptance is the door. So just let go, and see what begins to flow back in. Thank you for walking this path with me tonight. Until next time, remember, stay curious, stay courageous, and question everything.